Okay, hello everyone. This is our mini lecture for session 2.1 or chapter 3 of your textbook, and the title is Leadership and the Role of the Change Agent. So I just wanted to stress that this is a mini lecture, so it's not meant to cover all the necessary topics of this chapter, but it's a good idea for you to go over this so you'll know what is important for especially when you're preparing for your assignments. Okay, so we are expected today to discuss the role, the needed skills, and provide examples of what we call organizational development or OD practitioners. Um, we should be able to summarize the process of developing a contract between the change agent and a client. And then lastly, we want to compare and contrast the advantages and disadvantages of either using an internal or an external change agent. So the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, who is the OD practitioner? Okay, so again, OD is for short for organizational development or organization development. So there are three types of people who are now involved in leading change, in the change process in an organization. So the first is an external OD professional. So if you're going to do a change process within an organization, you can basically hire someone from the outside. This person could be a professional who is what we call a freelancer. So this professional might do services for different organizations, depending on who hires him or her. So OD professionals definitely would have usually the professional qualifications to conduct this kind of consultancy. Sometimes they're also very trained in providing training, and they oftentimes have the experience working as what we call OD professionals. But an OD professional could also come from your own company. So within large corporations, we often have specialized OD practitioners that may actually work within the HR function or an HR department, and they could be assigned to different departments within the organization, depending on whether there's a change initiative that's required within that department. So again, these OD skills are gained usually from experience or on the job, or sometimes they are actually qualified through training or formal education. And usually they come from the HR department. Now, the third type of person who can lead a change management process might be an internal manager or an administrator within a company. So this person may not have the formal skills or the formal qualifications to conduct an OD change or a change program, but that person usually would have a lot of experience in managing change and facilitating a change process within an organization. Okay, now when you're going to be working as an OD consultant and you come to the an organization who could be what we call a client, it's really important to develop what we call a contract. Now this contract is simply an agreement, and this agreement, by the way, depending on the formality, it can be a formal contract that's prepared by lawyers, or it could simply be just a very informal but written down agreement on the expectations of the client and also the expectations of the OD consultant. So it's prepared to establish what we call mutual expectations. In other words, what is the strategic or operational focus of that particular project? Or it also is there to make sure we identify who is accountable for the project and also who is in charge of the process. So oftentimes the hiring client, who may be an actual person within the organization, may hire an external consultant to conduct the change process. But then who is accountable for that project might be the consultant, but then who is in charge of the entire thing, uh, rather who is accountable for the success or failure of that project might be the client, but who the person in charge of the process of building that change will of course be the OD consultant. So within that contract, intervention activities are usually outlined. There's usually a discussion on what is the intention or the goal of each of these intervention activities. There's also deadlines and what resources have agreed to be provided to the OD consultant. And even things like whether the consultant needs any information and data, and also who the members of the project might be. So an OD consultant might be the leader of the change process, but he or she may be assigned people from within the company to help him or her out. And also of course, it outlines, the contract will outline who is responsible or accountable for certain deliverables. All right, an effective OD practitioner has, of course, certain competencies or skills. The first is very good intrapersonal skills. So in other words, he should have some emotional intelligence, which we will discuss further on. He must have good self-awareness of his own emotions, and also a very curious individual, somebody who asks questions within the organization and tries to solve issues by using a questioning approach. That person also has very good interpersonal skills. In other words, he gets along very well with other people. He's able to create professional relationships with the people in the organizations, not just with his client, but with the people who will be affected by the change process. So this person usually has very good consultation skills. And they are able to manage all the stages and facets of a typical consulting process. This person needs to have very good knowledge of OD theory and the processes of change. So if you recall, last week we were talking about change models and approaches like Lewin, like the action research approach, the positive change model. All of those models, an OD practitioner should be aware of those models or approaches, and he or she should be able to apply these models to an actual situation. So the OD practitioner is what we call an instrument of change. He's not responsible for the change, but basically he is a change agent. Okay, so he facilitates the change process within a department or an organization, the entire organization. Their relevant experience and their relevant accomplishments are critical in their selection. So in other words, you don't get the job to do a change management project unless you actually have the experience and you have accomplishments that you can show your client that you've been responsible for. Consultants should be upfront about their strengths and their weaknesses and their range of competence. In other words, there are OD consultants who specialize in certain aspects of OD. For example, training. That could be one specialty an OD consultant might be looking at. Another could be motivation. Another could be a performance management system. And an OD might be able to have the expertise to implement such a system within an organization. All right, I'm going to stop here for a moment, and we're going to be watching a video about the role of the OD professional. I believe this video is listed down as 2.1.1. So go back to Moodle and watch this video on your own. Now, if you're part of a live session, just wait for your lecturer to come in and he will play the video and you guys can watch it all at the same time. Okay, we're back. So in a few minutes, we'll be discussing the role of the OD professional. We'll discuss basically advantages and disadvantages of an internal and an external OD professional. We'll look at the marginality of OD professionals. We'll look at the emotional demands that are required of an OD professional and how he uses this to his advantage. We'll discuss also the use of the knowledge and experience of a typical OD consultant, and also have a little bit of discussion on the typical career of OD professionals. Okay, so as we mentioned before, the internal change agent is somebody from within the company. And this OD professional, whether qualified or not, has certain advantages. And because he is already working within the company, when a client needs a professional or a person to guide the change process, he doesn't have to spend a lot of time searching for somebody from the outside. He can simply look inside, um, um, not hire, but basically appoint someone from within the company to start this change process. The good thing about getting an internal change agent is because he is already part of the organization, he has ready access to his clients. So it's very easy for him to meet, or her, to meet with his or her client within the organization. Usually, this professional has an intimate knowledge of the organization, its dynamics, culture, and informal practices. So an internal practitioner or internal change agent, it has that knowledge. That's pretty important, especially when you're in a hurry. If you're an organization that needs to implement a change very quickly, that person doesn't need to spend 2 weeks trying to understand the way the company works and the culture within the company. This person usually has access to a variety of information, internal company reports and direct observations. That's really important because he or she has that experience with the employees within the organization. He brings with him or her all of these observations he's had in the past, and he's able to, or she is able to, use that in his analysis and the way he manages the change process. Usually somebody from the inside is less threatening than outsiders and better able to establish rapport and trust. So because he's from there, people immediately, maybe they already have a relationship with him. So it's not hard for him to start the ball rolling. Now, there are certain disadvantages if you're already within the company and you've been appointed to manage a change process. Remember that the change process can be quite emotional. It can involve a lot of conflict. And so, hiring somebody from the inside has its drawbacks. The first is a lack of objectivity. So obviously that person already has relationships with employees within the company. And even if it's a really professional relationship, there's that attitude that he or she may not want to damage that relationship or to disturb that relationship. So oftentimes this results in a change agent who is overly cautious, likely when dealing with internal power structures. So, knowing that this person works in that organization, you can imagine that he doesn't want to step on anyone's toes, especially a big boss or a manager. Knowing that if his findings, for example, may point to a mistake or a bad performance coming from one of the managers, then that manager could be very upset with his findings and it could take it very personally. So internal change agents also, because they work within the company, they may not have enough experience or enough variety of experience to deal with certain change challenges within the company. Unlike an external change agent, this change agent, we assume that that person has been exposed to different situations in different industries, and therefore they can use that knowledge to be brought into the organization. So in fact, here we're talking about the advantages of the external change agent. So again, an external change agent could be a professional who is qualified to do OD interventions, or change management for other clients. And therefore, he has got a lot of experience and a variety of experience that he can use to bring into the organization. Such expertise or experience may not necessarily be available inside the company. Usually, an external change agent would have a more objective perspective into the organization's development process. That means he's not biased. He's more objective. He doesn't think about whether he has friends within the organization. He doesn't think about, if I say something or if I recommend something, will that in fact damage my relationship with anyone within the company? Usually, because he stands off from that organization, he can say what he wants to say without this thought that he may be ostracized in the future. So an external agent also has the ability to probe difficult issues and to question the status quo. In other words, as I was saying, this external agent can say what he wants without this fear that he's going to destroy the power structure. It might disturb some of the long-running managers within organization. And because they're from the outside, many companies actually look with more respect and grant this outsider a little bit more power because, again, he is from the outside. That's not always true, however. In some companies, they see outsiders as people who don't understand the situation, and therefore they may not give that respect and power. Again, that depends on the organization's culture. Okay, the disadvantages of an external change agent. Because he's from the outside, he may not be familiar with the industry and definitely will not be too familiar with the organization that's hiring him. It'll take time for him to get himself acquainted with the organization. It'll take time for him to diagnose the problems of the organization, and also to analyze and what his role will be and how more effectively he can contribute to creating that change. And many organizations, as I mentioned before, are quite wary of outsiders. This means that because you're not from within the organization, they see you as somebody who doesn't understand what's going on. And they see outsiders, or especially outside consultants, as what we call armchair strategists. These are people who are sitting very comfortably and saying this and saying that and telling people to do certain things when they don't really understand how difficult it is, how difficult the situation is from within the company. So in many organizations, the perception is that outsiders don't really care about the outcomes of their actions. So in other words, an outsider external agent might come in and recommend that the company fire or terminate, say, 20% of the workforce because they believe that this workforce is not busy enough, or perhaps they're not productive enough. So they may give that very callous or very strong suggestion, even though, again, although it might be the right outcome, and it can save the company some money, but they don't consider, the outsiders don't really consider the emotions. They don't really consider that people are affected by these redundancies. Okay, so we were saying earlier that any change practitioner, OD practitioner, must be what we call a marginal person. So whether he's from the outside or from the inside, he must have this degree of what we call objectivity, which is very similar to marginality. So the marginal person is one who has empathy and understanding of the groups they work with. So if a change agent goes into a situation and tries to figure out what's the problem, he or she must have a very good empathy on what is going on for both sides of the picture. So in other words, two groups might be in conflict, and that might be, in fact, the change objective is to try to get them to work better together. But a marginal person does not take sides. He or she does not look at one group and prefer this group over the other, and he really looks at it in a more professional, more objective manner. So remember that groups may have differing goals, value systems, and behavior patterns, which causes what we call conflict. So a great example of this is the typical conflict that you have between marketing, a marketing department, and the finance department. So the finance department often sees the marketing activities as sort of like a waste of money, perhaps. Not all of them, but that's a general, a more common, traditional, stereotypical thought that the marketing department spends money and doesn't really earn, they're not really accountable for the revenue that's coming in. While the marketing department might look at the accounting or the finance department as a group that's always watching over them. Perhaps they don't see the bigger picture and how these marketing expenses actually drive awareness and product trial, and of course loyalty uh, to retain customers. So again, both have differing goals, both have differing value systems, and if there's a change process that involves those two groups, the OD consultant or the OD practitioner has to come in and basically referee between these two groups. And again, he must not take sides, one or the other. He has to see the side of marketing and the side of finance and come out with um, a solution that is happy, that makes everybody happy. So again, OD practitioners should have what we call a marginal orientation. When they come in, they don't take sides. So an example of a marginal role, again, a marginal role also means that they can easily understand and empathize with the sales department and also empathize with customers. So a good example of this marginal role will be a salesperson. And the reason for that is a salesperson, of course, sees the side of the company. He's trying to sell a product that the company is trying to come up or trying to market. But at the same time, he also is in contact with the customer, and he knows what the customer wants. And basically, he's like a referee between the company and the customer. Now, he's trying to give feedback to the company about what our customers want. And at the same time, for the customer, he's trying to sell and give the benefits of the product from the company. A company buyer may also be an example of a marginal role. A company buyer is usually the person in the purchasing role within the company. He might be, or she might be, a person assigned to purchase the raw materials that are used by the company to build its product. And therefore, this person has a lot of interaction with suppliers and a lot of interaction with the company itself. And he plays that role, understanding what the company wants, which is usually lower priced raw materials, and also what the suppliers want, which is they want to have a good profit or good return for the products that they're selling the company. So he plays that role, a balancing role between the two. A first line supervisor also is a marginal role. And the reason for that is he has very good relationships with the people under him, the subordinates. And usually these subordinates are the ones that are meeting with customers. And this first line supervisor also has relationships with upper management. And so he is the management representative within the front lines of a company. And therefore, he knows what his bosses want, and he needs to be able to uh, reconcile that with the demands of his subordinates. So the subordinates, for example, would want, we want more time to be able to understand this product before we sell it. But then the company the managers above him are telling him, no, we want this sold right away. So he's got to play that balancing, refereeing role between management and the salesperson, because he's the first line supervisor. A project manager is a very good marginal role. And the reason for that, project managers often deal with multiple departments within an organization. So the project to launch a brand new product usually would entail a research and development person, a marketing person, a finance person, a manufacturing person, all working within one team. And that team is basically been tasked to come up with a new product and launch a new product. So project managers, the ones in charge of this projects, are usually very good because they understand multiple roles within the organization. Another word for that is cross-functional. So oftentimes teams are cross-functional, which means they have different people from different departments working in one team. So some personal characteristics of marginal people or marginal change agents are that they're very practical. Okay, so although they may have studied OD theory, at the end of the day, it's about how do you use that in a practical manner. You don't effect change by giving a lecture to your employees about, oh, this is action research. No, it's really how do you apply that model in a very practical manner. Again, they are usually neutral. They don't take sides. They're very open-minded. So if somebody has an idea, they're very open. They want to be able to listen to these ideas and also perhaps build on those ideas, and also bring together different ideas and maybe combine them. So he's very objective. He's very flexible. He doesn't necessarily stick to certain rules and regulations. And he's very adaptable, especially when it comes to information processing ability. So he gains a lot. He gets a lot of data, for example, customer surveys, etc. And he's able to make use of all that information and come out with a very good conclusion, which can help him create studied recommendations. Now, a marginal person is not one who is upset by conflict, ambiguity, or stress. So what we mean by ambiguity here is they can cope with situations that are not clear-cut. We're not sure of what the problem is. We're not sure who is at fault. We're not sure what the solution is. But a marginal OD practitioner basically can thrive on this kind of situations. So in other words, he does not just that he doesn't mind it, but he actually enjoys that unclear nature of things and how things are very undefined. The marginal OD practitioner is able to bring opposing groups together. So if you've got a person, an OD consultant who is hated by different groups within the company, usually that is not a good candidate, because he'll never be able to shake off that impression of him, and it'll be difficult for him to work with other groups. And again, he needs to remain neutral in controversial situations. So an example of a controversial situation could be a company decides to go on redundancy, or that means that they are reducing the number of people within the company for different reasons. He must remain neutral in the sense that he needs to understand why there is going to be a redundancy and the need for the company to cut expenses. But he also has to understand the difficulties of the employees, many of them who will be losing their jobs. So again, he shouldn't be taking sides in such situations. All right. The position or the challenge of being an OD professional can be quite emotional. Remember that he has to listen, he has to understand the feelings of his clients, he has to understand the people who are affected by change. So it is very, what we call, emotionally demanding, this position. The role requires a lot of emotional intelligence. This concept actually is discussed a lot in different units in the college. if you've taken organization behavior, usually we discuss what EQ or EI is all about, emotional intelligence. Basically, EQ refers to the ability to have, number one, awareness of your own emotions. You should understand whether you're angry, whether you are happy. Why are you angry when it comes to a situation? Because if you are aware of the reasons why you have certain emotions, generally it gives you better control over these emotions. So you need to also be aware of other people's emotions. So you should know when they're hurt. You should know when they're angry. You should know when to calm them down. You should know when to stop and when to go, especially when you're having a very difficult conversation with an employee. Of course, there's self-control of one's emotions. So an OD consultant needs to be able to control his anger. Even when he's insulted, he should be able to keep up a stoic face, which means you don't show emotion. But at the same time, you should show empathy. In other words, you should show that you understand people. But it means that sometimes you need to control emotional outbursts. Okay. You also need to be able to influence other people's emotions. So not just yourself, control your emotions, but also try to influence and regulate other people's emotions. Sympathize with them. Show them that they're not alone. Show them that there are other people in the same situation. Show them that you are supporting them if you're the OD consultant. So emotional intelligence usually increases with age and experience and can be self-developed. In other words, many people have predisposed ability to be very emotionally intelligent, but then others may not. They may be quite emotional or impulsive. So for example, for me personally, I would consider myself quite impulsive in many cases. I often can be quick to anger and emotion. But then I've learned through time of how to step back and control my own emotions and study why I'm feeling in a certain way. And therefore, because of that, I've been able to develop some emotional intelligence. So you too can, as a student and as a future, hopefully, OD practitioner, you need to be able to develop this emotional intelligence. All right, so an OD consultant, basically when he's working with this client, there are times when he's using a lot of his knowledge and his own experience in trying to manage the change process. So that's here on the very top of the scale, the use of a consultant's knowledge and experience. So at this scale, you will see that this area here represents the amount of work and knowledge and actions that a consultant is actually using um, to, to manage the change process. So in this particular dimension, a consultant is doing the planning of the implementation. He's recommending and prescribing certain solutions. But as you go down the line of this graph, or not this graph, but this image, you will see that the consultant's knowledge and experience or the use of that knowledge and experience begins to reduce. So you can see this light beige color is slowly reducing. And the use of the client's knowledge and experience is growing as it goes down. So in other words, it depends on the situation. In some situations, a consultant is demanded to do a whole lot of things, including planning and even implementing a solution. But oftentimes, all he really does is listen, and he reflects and he clarifies and interprets. And usually, the implementation might be done by the client himself. And this is why we need an agreement or a contract. So it's clear who is in charge of what within a change management program. So usually the consultant will work with the client, but then they have to agree on who is in charge of this intervention activity. So for example, there's a team building that needs to be done. Who will be doing this team building? Will it be the OD consultant, or will it be conducted by the client or somebody within that organization? So OD professionals, as I mentioned before, this is actually a career. In many cases, there are OD specialists, and that's all they do is they do OD interventions, and they work with different clients, and they are what we call freelancers. They can work depending on who is hiring them. So again, this is a kind of profession where people can enter it from all walks of life. You don't need to be a corporate person. You could be a person who works in the auto industry, for example. Maybe your past life you were within automobile manufacturing or something like that, but you become an expert in the manufacturing process. So you take that knowledge with you and you bring that into manufacturing of different products. Most OD practitioners need to have specific training in organizational development. So they gain that by short courses and even tertiary level qualifications. So in other words, there are courses that are specific to organizational development or organizational change. Experience is very important. So although you've got a lot of this theoretical knowledge, it doesn't really count for much. What's more important is you're able to apply this knowledge in real life. So really, this is why in this subject, you students will be required to do an assignment which really mimics or simulates this experience of an OD professional. Now, the OD professional, again, as we said so before, and I'll take you back to that slide, he has to create a contract. And that contract, again, clarifies on what he's supposed to do. It's like a proposal, and the client has to agree to it. And so the first part of your assignment will be about this, developing that contract. And that first part, we will test this as a midterm test. So the questions will be really about, what's the role of the OD consultant? What's his objective? Okay, so we'll be asking those questions to you during the midterm. Okay, so newer OD consultants can also learn from more experienced practitioners. So if you're an OD consultant and you're fresh from university, usually what you do is you team up with a more experienced practitioner who can help you or mentor you, and to get your feet wet and to try out new things, try new experiences and build up your client base so that you can gain that experience. This profession is actually quite stressful. Usually, consultants burn the midnight oil. In other words, they're often working for, not surprising, that sometimes 24 hours you're working on a project because you have a deadline to finish. So a lot of burnout and stress is quite common. And this is a challenge right now that many consultants have to undergo. In many firms, their consultants really don't last very long because, again, of the long hours. So you need to take breaks. You need to know how to manage your time. You need to know how to deal with the stress that comes with consultancies. Now, ethics is also quite important if you're an OD professional. As the profession of the OD specialist matures, there has been increased attention on establishing ethical standards and guidelines to deal with an array of ethical dilemmas faced by the OD professional. Now, here are some of the concerns that are often coming out nowadays. So a lot of OD professionals are misrepresenting themselves. In other words, they're claiming to have certain competencies. They're claiming that they have experience working in this industry, when in actuality, they really have not worked in that industry. Again, they're misrepresenting themselves in order to gain a client, especially when, of course, in these times when business is quite challenging. There's a lot of businesses that are folding up or perhaps are on suspended animation. You can imagine the demands on a OD consultant who's trying to get more clients, and therefore there's a lot of temptation for them to lie about their past experience. Another thing that OD consultants are accused of doing is misusing data. So they may be, imagine if you've implemented a change program, and then after doing a survey, you find out that actually it hasn't worked. Your all the things that you've done, and people have not actually undergone the change. So in other words, they didn't quite move from unfreeze to movement. They may have moved a little bit, but they went back to their old bad habits. Now, when that happens, of course, there's temptation for the OD consultant to lie about this information and to say, well, actually, it was really successful, right? I did a survey, I asked the employees, and they said, all good. But it could be that in actuality, people had some misgivings or some concerns that actually it didn't really do anything. So that is a concern. And again, if you're the client, you need to be very careful about the data that's being collected by a consultant. There's also coercion involved in change. So when an OD consultant perhaps or practitioner is frustrated and cannot seem to implement the change he's been tasked to do, then he may resort to threats. So he might threaten an employee, even if that person is not in danger of losing their jobs. The practitioner might say, well, if you don't shape up, your boss will fire you. So that's an unfair statement. It may not be true, and you're just using it to scare a person impacted by the change to cooperate. So there could also be a value and goal conflict. So the goal of the company might be to try to increase its profits, but then this might mean declaring redundancy and um, uh, reducing its workforce. And that might not be something that the OD consultant wants to happen. He may feel that that's a very callous and very might be the wrong thing to do in terms of the employee. So that for example, in these times, a lot of companies, even if they can afford to keep an employee in, they may cause a redundancy. Again, it's about profit for them, but then that might be against the values of the OD professional, and therefore there's often a stressful conflict between what his client wants and what he personally believes in. So another concern is ineptitude. In other words, this OD consultant just may not have the right skills. He may have the qualification, but he may not be able to implement, or he may not be able to do a proper facilitation of change because he doesn't have the experience, perhaps. So again, that could be a very concerning part, a very challenging part for an OD consultant, because so if you don't have that qualification or the experience to do something like this, a consultant could instead bluff his way or lie. In other words, cause some misrepresentation. Okay, so that's it for our mini lecture. Please go back to the live session. If you're doing a live session, go back please to the Zoom session, and your lecturer will give you more instructions.